There are only two things that I always keep open: my wallet for any documentary featuring 1990s professional wrestling, and an acoustic guitar and open tuning. So today, we're talking about that sweet, sweet open G tuning. So if maybe you're just starting out on guitar, this could be a great tuning to jump into right away because you can do a lot of really cool sounding stuff right away with very little effort. Or if you just haven't explored tunings ever, this is the video for you. So I like Open G a lot because it's half new tuning, half standard tuning. Okay, so what I mean by half standard tuning is the D, G, and B strings are tuned exactly the same as they would be in standard. All you do is you take the high E strings, tune them down to a low D, and then a low D on the high E string, and then you take that A string and you tune it down to a G. So we have a D, a G, another D, and another G, and then a B and a D. Okay, so all of the strings played at once end up giving you a combination of G, B, and D, which is a G major chord. That's why it's called Open G. Okay? But there's some really cool, interesting stuff that we can do just using some simple shapes. Now, one of the most interesting things about Open G is that the lowest note is not the root note of your key, because we're talking about the key of G, but the lowest note is actually a D. So that can work in our favor, as we're going to see as we go through the lesson. All right? So the first thing that I want to talk about are just intervals, and that's just spaces between two things, whatever they are. Usually on guitar, we're talking about spaces between frets. Whole steps and half steps are how we measure them. Whole step is 2 frets, half step is 1 fret. So what we can do is let's just focus on the lower strings right now. In fact, let's focus on actually the open G and then open D strings right here. So if you make an E minor chord shape in standard tuning, just 2 on the 5th string and 2 on the 4th string if you go traditionally. I always think of the lowest string as the 1st string. And this is confusing talking about strings because it's like, oh, just take the low E string. Well, this is now actually the low D string. Just look at the shape. So if we have 2 here, 2 and 2, right? Open and open would be a G power chord. It's just a G note and a D note, all right? G, A, B, C, D. It's a root note and it's 5th, okay? So those take on the form of a power chord. You've probably used power chords on guitar. They look like, you know, this, the sound of rock and roll. One of the reasons guitar is great. But the cool thing about a power chord is it isn't major and it isn't minor. So we can do these 2 strings together and go through the chord scale, all right? What that means is we're gonna play a power chord off of every single note in the key of G. And we can just run it all the way through the G string now. Again, we used to be the A string, using the major scale formula, okay? So it's gonna sound like this. Okay? So all we have to do is you have to start with open and open, again, on the 2nd and 3rd string, if you're savvy, what used to be the A and D string. And then we go a whole step, so 2 frets higher. So open and open, then 2 and 2, then 4 and 4, 5 and 5. Basically, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? So really easy because E minor is the easiest shape to start out on. But now we're using them to play all the different power chords in a key. And the cool thing, aside from just focusing on just these 2 strings, is you can add all the strings on top to actually get some cool sounds. Because if we think about just the highest 3 strings now, we have a G and a B, just like in standard tuning, and then a D, right? Remember, we tuned that high E string down to a D. So if we just play the 3 highest strings, that's a chord in and of itself. That's a G major chord, all right? And the cool thing about that is actually a G major chord in order. G, B, D. So let's actually play this chord on top of each of the power chords. So we've got G, whole step, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now Now, real quick, I'm gonna amend the very last whole step we did. This is where it kind of comes into the difference between the key of G and the key of D, because you can also play a lot of the chords in the key of D on here. But the one thing to remember is with a D string, and now we have two of them, if we played the key of G intervals without that, we would actually end up with one minor difference, right? Instead of going whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, that last interval, instead of being 1 fret apart, is actually 2 frets apart. I'll do it in the right place. Okay, so the note in the key of G in relation to D would be a C. There's a C right before D. There's only one sharp in the key of G, so F sharp, right? So there's G, 12th fret of the G string, and F sharp, and there's D, 12th fret of the D string, and C. So if we were to actually stay in the key, by the time we get here, we would get this one exception. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind if you do want to go this high, but also it does sound fine doing that anyways, because it kind of begs for that resolution. I think, again, either way, however you do it, it's just kind of one small difference that separates the key of G from the key of D. And I think in a lot of ways they kind of sound good together. You can kind of have a C or a C sharp and throw them in each one, and you know, as long as it sounds cool, right? So really just kind of memorize that pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And then just kind of have fun, move around. Resolve to just the open string set if you're playing it like that. And another surefire way to get it to sound great is to put elixir strings on your guitar. Just restrung this last night, actually with some new bridge pins too. Check out those red bridge pins I got on the Martin here. But yeah, elixir 12s really brought this guitar back to life. It was kind of sounding dead because it has some super ancient strings on it, but now it's like the sustain, the feel of just moving. Everything feels better now that I have elixirs on it. The sustain has definitely increased with just like how the strings have come back to life. And again, no matter what guitar you're using, it's gonna stay in tune longer just because they're great stable strings. I'm just a huge simp for elixir strings. They sponsor a bunch of videos of mine. Please support the channel, get yourself some strings. There's an affiliate link in the description. Shout out to Elixir, the official sound of Open G, all right? Now there's a lot of other cool things that we can do aside from just thinking of those intervals, and that's just thinking of the chords within them, all right? So everybody knows G major is a major chord in the key of G, and then the other two major chords would be C major and D major. Now we can do that thinking of them as the 1, 4, and 5 chords in this key. 1, whole, whole, half, 4, whole step, 5, right? 1, whole, whole, half, whole, right? So there we go. That's how we get the 1, 4, and 5 chords in a key, which you can recreate just by barring the 5th fret and the 7th fret. But, you know, if you're just starting out, maybe it's kind of difficult to fully bar 6 strings on an acoustic guitar. So what you might want to do is just think that the 5th fret all the way down the line and the 7th fret all the way down the line are just kind of fair game for anything you might want to play. So what you can do is you can maybe just randomly pick a few of those different frets to hold down. So let's say I still want to, you know, maybe get some dynamic strumming with everything open, but I'm just going to randomly kind of hit the 7th fret on the B string to the 5th fret, to the G string 7th fret, to the G string 5th fret. And right there, that's like a really musical thing that I'm just kind of messing around with. And all I'm doing is just targeting a couple spots where I know all these notes are fair game, right? So a cool thing about that is like, all right, without even really knowing anything about where all the notes in the G major scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, where they're laid out all over the fretboard, I know that open all the way down is fair game, 5 all the way down is fair game, and 7 all the way down is fair game. So essentially, I get this little scale right here. In fact, I could go open too, so open 5, 7, open 5, 7, open 5, 7. And then just go backwards too. And I know all that stuff is just gonna sound great. So I have 6 different strings, 3 times 3 locations. I have 18 notes that I can kind of just, really experiment. I'm sure there's some kind of mathematical equation to find out how many different combos we have there. But especially when you change a note near the top of the chord, the higher notes of the chord, our ears will perceive a melody on top of a chord more distinctly. And I think it just sounds really cool, right? In fact, you don't even have to do one at a time. You can maybe start to double up. Maybe I'll get the 5th fret on the B string and then the 7th fret on the highest string. Maybe I'll do 5 and 5. Now I'll do 7 and 5. 5 and 7. And I know it's always gonna sound good. So I think that's like a really cool thing, especially if you're just starting out on guitar, is like knowing that, like, all right, I know where notes are, and I don't have to worry about kind of going all over the fretboard or maybe keeping my hand in like a hand position you have to memorize. Super easy, just open 5 and 7. Now, if you do want to maybe take it to the next level, let's just think about the one note that is different from a major chord and a minor chord, okay? It's that third. The reason that we've tuned this in this way, again, the notes again are D, G, D, G, B, D. So that B is the major third in the key of G, G, A, B, okay? The third is what makes a chord either major or minor. So we can play full chords through the entire neck if we think about that B string and where it is. The only difference between a major chord and a minor chord is with a minor chord, the third is flat, so it's 1 fret back, okay? So a good way to think about this would maybe be, if we think of, let's just look at this right here. Okay, so remember, I said this was a G, A, B, C major. So we said before that just the highest 3 strings fulfill the obligation of a G major chord. So this right here is a C major chord. All right, we have a C, an E, and a G. Now, if we flatten that third on the B string, we end up here. That's C minor, okay? So, now we could use C minor in this key to do stuff. It's called a minor 4 chord. That's something that, you actually kind of come across in a lot of music. So it's something that's not totally uncommon. In fact, it's actually very traditional to go major to minor 4, right? See, there's everything in a straight line, and those with a minor third for the minor chords in this key. So let's run through all the chords in just the highest 3 strings, all right? So we got open, open, open on the highest 3 strings is G major. The 2 chord looks like this, 2, 1, 2, A minor. B minor is a whole step from there. You just take the same shape, whole step. So we have our chord, a whole step, and again, I say whole step even though the minor third is only a half step. There's B minor, another whole step from there. If we think of the highest string, now we've got our C and our D. Our E minor, our 6th chord, is going to be the minor shape here. And then we can go all the way down, back to G again, okay? So we're skipping one of them right here, that diminished chord, but if you want to, you can kind of just double up on that, 11, 10, 10, just like that, right? But the cool thing is now we have a little bit of extra information just thinking of altering a couple different spots here. Okay, so we eventually do get everything in the key of G just from having one alteration of information, flattening the third, whatever's on the B string in line. So now we can actually take that and then just combine that with what we know about the open lower strings. That's what's really cool about this tuning is because it's D, G, D, G. These aren't major or minor, these are just straight root and a fifth, right? So we can take this all the way down as just bar chords. We just have to think of the top. And then one last thing on just the minor chord here. If you take your ring finger off and just 1 and 2, well, that's kind of like A minor right there. Because remember, the D, G, and B strings don't change at all. So anything that you think of from standard tuning is gonna stay the same on these 3 strings. So you could have an A minor like this, and a B minor like this, C major, and I'm just focusing on, I'm just hitting the D, G, and B strings. There's D, E, back, okay? So the last thing I wanna do is a cool little alteration that we could do with that same shape by what used to be making it a 7 chord. Love this right here. All right, so if you've ever played A minor 7 in standard tuning, all you do is you take your ring off, and now it's a G. There, open G instead, right? But let's talk about what we're actually playing now, because now we have a D, a G, an E, G, C, D. Okay, so I don't actually have an A in here, so it's not an A minor 7 like it would be, but I can still use this shape, and I think that really lends itself to getting to experience the best of an open tuning, because a lot of the cool stuff, like for instance, this one right here is actually just a G major. It's like a really interesting G major chord voicing, which maybe you should look at as like an E minor 7 chord voicing, but keeping this in line, I think is like a really beautiful way to utilize the best of open G, right? So all I'm doing is I'm taking my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the D string and my pointer finger on the 1st fret of the B string. Putting it in a position where maybe like I'm thinking of a minor chord, then a step higher, then I get to the major chords. And then just running it up and down, and I think it just sounds fantastic. Probably won't sound as good if you don't have elixir strings on there, but you definitely should, because elixir strings are like the Macho Man Randy Savage of guitar strings, and the real ones don't even need me to explain that any further because you already know. So thanks for checking it out. Get your guitar tuned to open G, and then just start kind of exploring and having a good time, because it's really hard to make it sound bad once you just know a little bit of information about what's fair game and what's not. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up in the comment section, Instagram, or the website. I'll talk to you all soon.